Welcome to another installment of Monday Q&A. I hope you've all had a fantastic weekend. I sound a little bit under the weather because I am a little bit under the weather, but luckily you can't catch germs through the medium of YouTube just yet. As always, thank you to everybody who submitted a question for this week's Q&A. I'm going to do my best to get to as many of those as I can. And if you've got a question you would like me to answer on next week's video, simply leave it in the comment section below. If you like what I'm doing on the channel, you can check the video description. My Patreon, the music that I make with Ragdoll, and my Discord are linked there. You can also get some free IRs and support my channel in other ways. Alrighty, well, let's get into it. One reason I love doing these Q&As is that you will all hold me to task if I leave a stone unturned, and I certainly left a stone unturned last week talking about the greatest Ozzy Osbourne guitar players. I didn't even mention Brad Gillis. What's wrong with me? Brad obviously is pretty well known for being the guitar player in Night Ranger and being one of the great proponents of Floyd Rose abuse out there ever, even though kind of more a Jeff Watson guy when it comes to Night Ranger in particular. Jeff Watson's hammer is just sick, but I'm getting sidetracked. Speak of the Devil, Brad puts in a pretty phenomenal performance on there. And if you haven't checked that album out, while I still like Tribute as my favorite live Ozzy album, I kind of like Brad's tone on that album. You know, the classic Boogie Mark II. I think Brad was playing a Mark II-B. Huge tone, amazing performance. The fact that Brad was able to pull all of that together last minute. You know, this is before the internet. This is before Tab is widely available. He would have just got the tapes and had to figure all that stuff out. So with all of that in mind, it's a pretty phenomenal performance. And I had some fun listening to Speak of the Devil over the weekend. You should listen to some of it this week as well if you've never done it, because Brad Gillis is pretty awesome. And listen to some Night Ranger too. I'm sure you just heard some tinkling bells under that last clip. How do I deal with having cats in the studio? I'm just so used to it that doesn't really bug me, even though, yeah, you get cat hair everywhere when you have cats, and our cats are tabbies. They're not super long-haired, they're not short-haired. Lupin in particular, our big grey cat, he tends to leave big clumps of fur around, and if they've had a case of the zoomies at night and they've been playing with one another, keeping us up, I'll kind of find clumps on the carpet. But that's why I have a vacuum cleaner, and I try to vacuum at least every second day in here. You know, I need to vacuum because I'm a hairy person as it is, so having the cats in there is just a way to hold me to task. A lint roller is pretty essential as well, you know, especially when you're like me and 90% of your wardrobe consists of black jeans and black t-shirts. So yeah, it's hairy in here. I'm hairy as it is, so I'm used to it. Let me know about your favorite furry, feathered, or slimy friend, or maybe you're somebody who has kids and you're constantly stepping on Lego and having to deal with that. Let me know in the comments and we can all kind of share some tips and tricks about keeping our spaces clean. We talked about my favorite Ozzy Osbourne guitar players last week. Of course, the question was going to come up. Who's my favorite Dio guitar player? If anybody can boast a more impressive roster of guitar players than Ozzy, it's Dio. And, you know, last time I mentioned that we weren't going to count Tony Iommi in the Ozzy conversation. Well, guess who pops his head up again? Tony Iommi, because Dio recorded an absolutely classic album in Heaven and Hell with Black Sabbath, and I consider it a classic in every way. Mob Rules, such a great album as well. But then you've got Ritchie Blackmore in there, of course, because the first 3 Rainbow albums Ronnie is on. There's his work with Elf, which is pretty awesome if you like kind of early 70s boogie woogie rock and roll, and then all the solo albums as well. So let's see. Viv, Blackmore, Iommi, Doug Aldrich, Craig Goldie's in there, Tracy G, Rowan Robertson. Who else has played with Dio? Well, let's just kind of focus on, you know, the undeniable classics. I think Ritchie Blackmore. You know, Ritchie kind of brought Ronnie to the mainstream attention, so you got to put that in there. Rainbow Rising, it's probably my favorite album that was recorded in the 70s. It is in my top 5 rock albums of all time. So if I had to pick one person who played with Ronnie, it's going to be Ritchie Blackmore, which is pretty amazing because I love Heaven and Hell and I love Mob Rules. I also love the Dehumanizer album. That is such a great metal album. Computer God is devastatingly heavy. I is a great song as well. If you've never spent the time to listen to Dehumanizer, go and do it. There's also the albums they did as Heaven and Hell. There's some really good songs there as well. So the Iommi stuff is phenomenal. Kind of can't split the two between Blackmore and Iommi. If you're talking about the classic Dio guitar player, you got to talk about Viv. One of the coolest experiences that I've had is I got to see Last in Line. We were playing a festival that they were at, and it was Viv playing a Les Paul plugged straight into an Engel, one of the best guitar tones I've heard live. Andrew Freeman on lead vocals nailed the Dio stuff, and the band was just on. It was such a great performance. They played for 40 minutes, and they just nailed it. And my respect for Viv will never diminish because of that performance. Never been a massive fan of Craig Goldie's studio albums, and I think that's just the songs on those albums are, a little bit cliche and a little bit tired sounding, but there's that Live at the Spectrum VHS DVD that Dio did with Craig Goldie on guitar, and Craig is absolutely ripping, and massive props for that BC Rich. Is it a Gunslinger Craig's playing in that? It looks rad nevertheless, and I think Craig had the best hair in Dio, so points right there. And then Rowan Robertson, phenomenal. One of my friends actually did a session in LA where I think Rowan was either in before them or after them. They both played on this record together and said that Rowan's one of the nicest people they've met in the industry. And even though Rowan only played on that one Dio album, that was the first Dio album that I ever heard, being like 16 or 17 and going, oh, there's some bits on this which kind of sound like Black Sabbath. What's the deal with that? And also Rainbow. I wonder what the connection is, not knowing that it's the same guy in the band. So those albums are great. Probably the most overlooked stuff is the Tracy G stuff. I'm not super into those albums, so I don't have too much to say about that. But then right near the top tier for me, like neck and neck with Viv, is Doug Aldrich. I love Doug in Whitesnake, but I also love Doug in Dio. There was a Dio like Live in New York DVD with Doug on guitar. That is some of the best live guitar playing that I've ever heard in my life. Killing the Dragon is an absolutely slamming record as well. If you haven't listened to that one and you haven't listened to Magica and you consider yourself a Dio fan, do yourself a favor, go and listen to those. Some gear-related questions. Can you do a circular style delay with the Lexicon MPX-1? The circular delays, if you're unaware, are a pretty famous preset on the PCM 70. They kind of have this left, right, center thing going on with some diffusion, which kind of smears the delays out. The MPX-1 doesn't have a diffusion parameter for the delays, but you can kind of hack it because you can place effects inside the delay feedback path. So you can place a reverb in the delay feedback path to kind of emulate the diffusion. And what you do is you set a eighth note delay, a quarter note delay left and right, and you add cross feedback so you get the sum of those two values down the center. I'm pretty sure that I actually covered this on my MPX-1 video, so go and check that one out if you want to know how to do it. Kemper liquid profiling seems to be getting closer to being out in the wild. I watched the Kemper video where they were doing a liquid profile of a JCM 800 and I thought it sounded pretty good. One of the main drawbacks of capturing or profiling is that, it's often just a snapshot of a given amp model. So as soon as you turn the gain down too far or take the EQ too far out of the natural range, it doesn't really behave like the real amp would. So if you're an existing Kemper user, I think you're going to be pretty happy about this, being able to get accurate tone stacks, being able to get more accurate kind of gain on the amp. It's something I obviously haven't tried. I don't have a Kemper around here, but I would like to try it. I'd like to see how much that improves the experience because the Kemper's a great unit. It's kind of stood the test of time now. It's been out for so long. So many people use it. Yeah, there's things around accuracy with it that are very well documented, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't sound good. So it seems like the liquid profiles are a step in the right direction if you want to get a lot of accuracy. It kind of seems like a roundabout way of going with a tone match, for example. If you're on a fractal, you can bring up an amp model, dial it in pretty close to your real amp, and then close the gap by doing a tone match. This kind of seems like the other way around. But again, it's all tools in the toolkit, and the nice stuff about this is that it's a free update. So if you're a Kemper user and you've tried this, let me know, how do you like it? Is it something that's going to improve the workflow on there? Or are you going to maybe move on from the Kemper and get an Axe FX or Tone X or something like that? Let me know. My thoughts on Washburn guitars and why are they underrated considering they have Dimebag, Nuno, Jennifer Batten, Bootsy Collins, Paul Stanley as either current or previous endorsees. I have absolutely no idea. When I think of Washburn, I think of two things. I think about their affordable acoustic guitars that were kind of everywhere in the mid-2000s. Loads of people I know had a Washburn steel string acoustic as their first acoustic guitar, and they were actually really, really well spec'd for the price, and they sounded good. Furthermore, the fact that they were widely available and affordable was pretty cool as well, and I'm sure a bunch of people, if you're in Australia watching this, you've probably got one of those guitars kicking around. And of course, I think of Nuno. I know there's the Dimebag endorsement. After Dimebag was at Dean, he went to Washburn and then went back to Dean. My understanding is that Washburn are owned by the same company that owns Randall, or there's some kind of association there. So, you know, the Nuno signature amp and the Dimebag Randall amp association are probably keyed in there. They had the Stevens extended cutaway, which is kind of cool, and they had the Buzz Phaetine. Am I saying that right? Am I doing a piezo pickup thing? That tuning system on there as well. So it's not that they've been resting on their laurels the whole time. And I did read something a while ago where apparently Washburn were only behind Fender and Gibson, like at the end of the 80s or early 90s. So, you know, there's been such a big upswing in competition in the MI industry, and so many things have changed that maybe it's just become one of those brands that, like, yeah, it was near the top, and now it's probably pumping out the same numbers, but there's other companies who have just kind of overtaken it. So yeah, this is my super uninformed, non-research take on Washburn guitars. I played some nice stuff, but in terms of the history of the company or things like that, I'm actually not up to it, other than I know about that association with Randall. So yeah, fill me in the comments. You always hold me to task with these kind of things. So I'm going to go and do some reading. Thank you for the question. And maybe some people can actually weigh in and give me some information or point me in the right direction to kind of understand a little bit more about the company. If I could only play with one guitar, one amp, and a multi-effects pedal, I'm not allowed to use a modeler like a Fractal. What am I going to go with? Why do you people do this to me? There's too much great gear out there. All right, let's see if I can do this. I'm going to play a PRS. I don't know if I'm going to play my SC245 or my DGT. The DGT is probably a little bit more versatile, so if I can only have one guitar, I'm going to go with that. For an amp, I used a Marshall DSL-50 for years gigging and love that thing. I also love the Boogie Mark series stuff, even though it's a little more finicky to get dialed in. I think at this point in my life, I would probably go with a Mark series amp. So do I get to play a combo or a head? Because if I get to play a head, I can match it with different speaker cabs and get different sounds. Like a Mark series with greenbacks, can do some more classic rock stuff with vintage 30s, can be super tight, do modern metal. I don't need boost for it. So I think I'm gonna go in that direction. And then a multi-effects pedal. Well, Eventide, I've got the H90 out at the moment. I've got it on my studio pedal board, and that is going to do everything that I ever need on there. You know, maybe some stereo pitch detune, maybe a nice dual delay. If I want to go to outer space, I can use Black Hole or the Undulator on there. If you've listened to Ragdoll's Back to Zero album, you've heard lots of the H9 sounds. So that's actually the easiest part of that. I know the H90 is super easy. Otherwise, you know, like a Strymon Brig or a Strymon Dig or even a Boss DD8 would be totally fine for me. I think the only thing I would miss in that setup is a wah. Maybe I need to have a wah, a Mark Series head, some kind of PRS, and then an H90 in there. But these kind of questions scare me. I don't want to live in a world where I can't play all my favorite stuff all the time. That is it for this week. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's Q&A. If you've got questions for next week, let me know in the comments section below. And again, if you want to support what I'm doing here on the channel, keep the lights on and keep my cats fed. Check the video description to do that. Most of all, thank you so much for watching what I do on here, and I hope you have a fantastic week. Also hope you have the time to make some rude guitar noises. And when you do that, make it extra loud. See you next time.